Welcome back. We're continuing our look at the politics of oil and the high cost of fuel. I'm joined in New York by John D'Agostino, who helped to set up the Dubai Mercantile Exchange, and in Abu Dhabi by Dr. Ali Hussein, an oil industry consultant. And Dr. Hussein, I wonder if you see what benefits you see from higher oil prices and the higher fuel costs that result from that.
Well, Riz, there are two characteristics of oil. One, it is strategic to the world economy. It's very important to the world economy, to every one of us on this planet. And the second characteristic is that this is a depletable asset. One day we are going to finish this oil and there will be no oil. So what are the benefits? We have to take these two characteristics into consideration, because it is important. What is good for us? Do we have to pay higher price for oil, or do we have to have no oil at all? Frankly speaking, I think the present price, even if it is high, does not really reflect the real price of oil. I mean, for example, can we replace oil, for when we use it for lubrication, for transportation, and for petrochemicals? There are still no real alternatives to oil in these fields. So we need oil. We have to use oil. It is very important, very strategic, and at the same time, it is depletable. So higher oil prices will benefit the consumer, the producer, everybody. How? First of all, these higher prices will encourage people to conserve more oil, to use oil more efficiently, and this has been going on for the last 30 years, and I hope this will continue. Another thing, do we have to deplete this very important asset as soon as possible, or do we have to really keep it for us and for future generations? And so on and so forth. For example, for consumer, the major producers, they are developing countries. They need higher oil prices in order to develop their economies. For producers, they need oil, in the future. So oil producer can use this money to produce more oil.
Yeah. Dr. Hussein, there's obviously, I was going to say, there's also geopolitics. And just a quick answer to an email we got from a viewer, and I'd like you to tackle this. It's actually a short question, has a big answer, but I just want a brief response from you, sir. From Mark in Vancouver, who says, is oil the reason why the US invaded Iraq?
Well, frankly speaking, I don't really know whether oil was there or not. I mean, for example, if you ask American politicians, they will give you an answer. But of course, oil is very important, very strategic, to the whole world. And Iraq, which has a lot of reserves of oil, which, for example, in the future, the whole world will need Iraqi oil in one way or another. Perhaps, there was some reason for America to invade Iraq for that oil, but still, oil, as I said, and I always say, it is a very important strategic asset. And talking about higher oil prices, I believe it is really for the benefit of all, and especially for the consumers. Consumers have to really choose. Do they want cheap oil and finish it soon, or do they want higher oil prices to conserve for the future?
Well, let me ask John D'Agostino an email question we got from Daryl in Ohio in the USA here. And John, this question says, which countries will have a difficult time because of rising oil prices, and how will that trickle down?
Well, obviously, China and India will have issues. And actually, last week, I think the Financial Times reported that Asia, some countries in Asia had decided to drop subsidies on gasoline and crude oil imports because they just simply can't afford it anymore. One of the things that we have to just keep in mind is that the price of oil is, people always ask me, how high can it go? And the answer is, how high can we take it? As long as global GDP continues to grow, there really is no cap to how high oil prices can go. So we're going to look to China and India, and we're going to see how high can oil go before it retards that growth. And when that growth starts to scale back, then you should see oil push back. In addition, obviously, the US dollar's strength is going to have a play into that. But I think, obviously, US, of course, but China and India especially, because so much of their growth is industrial driven, they're going to hurt very much by sustained high oil prices.
Now, John, you had in the book Rigged, there's reference to you having to weave your way through pretty tricky Middle Eastern politics, including the power of Saudi Arabia, which is obviously the major supplier and a big force in all of this. And an email question that came in from Kent, who lives in West Virginia in the US, says, what responsibility does OPEC have in all of this?
Well, this is a tricky subject, and I'll just come out there and say it. I think I'm not going to opine on what OPEC should do. They're a collection of sovereign nations, and they can do what they wish. I'll just say this. I think it's extraordinarily naive for us to believe that OPEC, and let's be honest, when we say OPEC, we're talking about Saudi Arabia. So I think it's extraordinarily naive of us to believe that Saudi Arabia is going to act in any other manner besides what's in the best interest of its citizens. I'm always just fairly shocked when individuals say, why isn't Saudi working to lower prices? It's in their best interest not to do their best not to allow prices to escalate to the point where they kill demand. But you have to think about it like a company. A company has shareholders. Saudi has 27 million shareholders, the constituents of Saudi Arabia. And they have to look out for the best interest of their shareholders. If the U.S., if people from abroad said, why doesn't the U.S. do things that harm their economy to benefit other economies, my guess is we'd be kind of upset about that. So I don't want to opine on what Saudi should do. Of course, as someone who drives a car in the U.S., I'd love it if they did whatever they can do, and I'm not saying they can do something, in order to lower prices. Right. But I just think it's naive to believe that, and we should just really view them as a rational participant and focus on the things that we can control, like consumption, not passing laws or I should say not passing bills like we did recently, saying we're going to sue them for antitrust behavior. It's quite frankly silly and not going to really help us in the end.
Does that, just a quick thought before we take a phone call from a viewer, does that
Sure.
House of Representatives bill to sue OPEC and seize assets and so on, does that, as an oil trader, how much does that complicate your relationship?
It quite frankly doesn't, because it's just one of those silly things that happens in the halls of power that you may take a few jokes about it at dinner, but nobody really takes it seriously. But it's just yet another obstacle, just like the prohibitions on sovereign wealth funds investing in U.S. assets. This makes the market dry up and inserts inefficiencies in what should be a well-functioning market. Money is flowing out of the U.S. We should like it to flow back in. That's just logical. Okay,
Anwar in Paris has a question. Anwar, what would you like to ask?
Okay, thank you. Hi, gentlemen. I would like to ask the gentleman, anyone can jump on that. The oil prices increase rapidly. If it goes like that next 1 year, wouldn't be a disaster for global consumption? It will suffer for everyone. What do you think about
Anwar,
that?
let me ask Dr. Hussain about that. I mean, Anwar is saying that if the prices continue the way they are, that basically everyone suffers. Now, of course, sir, you've put a different proposition forward, but I wonder how you react to some of the protests you've seen on the streets. We have seen in Britain, France, Indonesia. It seems to be spreading that there's a public outcry to the prices.
Well, let me be frank and honest with you. I mean, let us take oil prices and let us take the prices that the final consumer pays. Let us go to Europe. Let us go to Britain and see how much each person, when he goes to the petrol station, how much money he is paying, for the liter he buys from this petrol station. 60% of that price is taxation. For heaven's sake, why do we have to put, all the blame on crude oil prices? And we always forget, the taxation, all these governments, East and West and Europe and even in America, this taxation they put on oil prices, and this is really affecting the consumers, affecting, the cost of whatever you are talking about. So I agree with John. We should not really just sit down and let oil prices go up to the sky and affect the world economy and world inflation. This is not in the interest of anybody. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and we have to do something about it. And I personally believe the best thing to do in this case, in this crisis, is that for the consumer, major and minor, and for the producers, major and minor, to sit together and have a very fruitful dialogue to see how this problem can be solved. Why can't we do that? I mean, Saudi Arabia, they have formed a forum in Saudi Arabia, for this dialogue. Why don't we sit down and talk, productively and fruitfully and objectively about this crisis, instead of blaming each other all the time? This is wrong. This is absolutely wrong.
John, just as we're sort of wrapping up the show, we've got a couple of minutes left. I have to ask you, getting back to the story rigged, when it comes to people weaving through that story as you found your way through oil politics, both in the Middle East and in America, what do you think people will learn from reading this book?
Well, I hope, and again, it took the author about 2 years to convince me to do this, because I really, quite frankly, had no interest in being the subject of an international bestseller. What I hope comes out of this is simply the injection of complexity into the characterization of Muslims, Arabs in the Middle East. I learned, and I was very, very fortunate. Most people don't get anywhere near the opportunity I did to go there and experience this part of the world. And the reason that this is important is not because I love the Middle East per se, I do, but it's because I love this country, I love the United States, and we have to understand what's going on there, and we can't stop viewing it as one simple set of people. Otherwise, these problems are never going to get solved.
Now, there was a remarkable opportunity that you came across in the case of Dubai and the Mercantile Exchange. Do you see this kind of opportunity arising anywhere again, or was this just a one-off shot that you were really lucky to get to be a part of?
I don't presume to be that arrogant that I identified the only opportunity. First of all, it wasn't just me; it was a tremendous team that allowed me to do this, and that I worked for, and I was a cog in the wheel. But absolutely, I see this happening in Oman, Bahrain. I see a foot race between Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Oman, Bahrain, as to who will become the financial center of the Middle East. And I have my own personal bias as to who's going to win, but I'll leave that. I'll leave that to myself. But I think that's phenomenal. I think that's great. I think it'll open up doors. I think it'll make things more accessible. And you'll see deals like this, structural deals. The big deals are fun and they're great, and we read about them, the billion-dollar transactions, the hotels and whatnot, and those are important. But the building of the foundation of capitalism, I believe, is extremely important. Capital markets, basic industry, property rights, all these things. When you see deals like this, you really should take notice, because the DME, the Dubai Mercantile Exchange, was not a big, nobody get rich off of this deal. There were no big investment banking fees, but it was incredibly important.
Well, John, we're going to watch out for that film that's made of the book. Congratulations, Dr. Ali Hussain. Thank you for being with us as well, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks for watching. On tomorrow's show, time travel, invisibility cloaks and Death Stars. Writer and scientist Michio Kaku believes they're all possible and tells us how. We'll see you for that one.